In fact, he has no solution if he's out of power. That's a problem. He's in a corner. He's an autocratic leader, but I think he's sincere when he speaks about humiliation of Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not because of, let's say, nostalgia from communism, but nationalist nostalgia. I had very deep conversations about that with him.
The empire.
The empire, the Russians that had no more homeland, that were staying outside Russia after the Soviet Union collapse. And he's on record, public record, saying that the biggest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union for Russia, national interest. So I think he's sincere. Having said that, in fact, at some point, and I can say that to you, one of the persons who told me that was Medvedev. I'm no longer in politics. My level of sincerity is increasing day by day. Now I'm not official of representing here my government, the country of my Portugal or the European Union or any other entity. And in fact, Medvedev is a real opportunist guy. He will always try to present to us as the moderate. And he was very critical of Putin when he was speaking with us privately. And now it's more hard than Putin. It's a very sad story, very sad story from a human point of view, that person. Anyhow, Putin, what Medvedev told us was when started those cholera revolutions, that Putin understood he could lose power. And that's when he started to increase the control of the Russian society in a much more authoritarian, or even now, I would say almost totalitarian way. Let me tell you a story that I think you remember that, but probably our public here, our colleagues here don't know. 2014, I was still in the commission when started the invasion of Crimea. I called Putin. I called on a first-name basis, Vladimir, what's going on? And he said to me, "No, it's not the Russian army. I can tell you, José Manuel, that if it was the Russian army, we would take Kiev in less than 2 weeks." That he said to me, and there were people taking notes, it was a phone call, in 2014. So the question is, why did he say it? I don't think you need to be a fan of psychoanalysis and Freud to understand that politicians sometimes, they express unintendedly hidden desires. It was the hidden desire that he was expressing. For me, Putin has never accepted psychologically, emotionally, that there is an entity called Ukraine. It's true what you said. He said to me, and by the way, he also is in public record, but he said to me, because we negotiated the association agreement, it was my commission who negotiated the association agreement for more than 5 years. We were meeting Putin and the Russians at least twice a year. He never objected to that agreement. He said, in principle, I have no objections to Ukraine joining the European Union, but I could not accept Ukraine joining NATO, to be honest. And by the way, the 2008 conference in Bucharest, where George W. Bush wanted us to define a path for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. And when Europeans, I was in that dinner with Angela Merkel and Sarkozy and Bush, George W. Bush, the Europeans said, no, that explains why it's a watered-down communique. But our idea was not to bring Ukraine in NATO. By the way, our idea was not to bring Ukraine in the European Union. I had very difficult meetings with Yushchenko or Timoshenko, telling you are not ready. What we can offer you is association, not membership of the European Union. But then it came at the final moments in Vilnius in the summit where Yanukovych told us also that under pressure of Putin, he could not sign what was an association agreement, not membership of the European Union. So in fact, Putin changed the goalposts, and afterwards, you know what happened, that invasion. Now, the interesting thing is, why was he doing in 2022 what he was not doing?
Yeah, that's the question.
I think basically for 3 reasons. After Syria, he thought that Russia was stronger. After Afghanistan, he thought the Americans and the West was weaker. And also now he has much stronger control of the society. By the way, eliminating, as it has done recently, but even before, putting in prison the main opposition leader. So there is a strong control. And also he has been prepared, the army, namely in terms of nuclear capabilities. Nuclear capabilities of Russia are in fact much stronger now than they were in 2014. This is the reason why I think now we took it, and I think we have to have a strong reaction, because what's going on is not as some... I've heard some leaders of the so-called Global South saying, oh, once again, those Europeans want us to say that their problems are everyone's problems. The reality is that it's everyone's problem.
Yeah.
Now it became a global conflict. When you see Iran or North Korea involved, I mean, that's a global conflict. We are already in a global conflict. The third global conflict already started. Not a war, thanks God, but we are already in the third global conflict. Because we have now China really supporting Russia politically, not yet militarily, I think, and I hope it does not happen. But we are, in fact, seeing a global fragmentation, and the Ukraine conflict has accelerated some trends that were already behind before, namely because of America-Chinese competition.
One more backwards-looking question before I let you talk about forward-looking. There have been histories written about your tenure in office, and I'm not sure, I don't agree with this criticism, but let me throw it to you anyway, which is Barroso was naive. By trying to negotiate with Ukraine, even on an association agreement, he opened the door for what came after, which was Russian nationalism, the attempt to crush Ukraine. How would you answer those critics who say, by trying to open the door to European membership to Ukraine, it triggered the response that has led Putin to be anti-European and eventually invaded?
Already at that time, and probably remember that, Peter, I made public statements showing that we were perfectly aware of the geopolitical dimension of this decision. And I said, can we accept a Europe divided, a kind of a limited sovereignty theory like the Soviet Union? Can we accept that the biggest country on the planet, Russia, geographically speaking, can say to the neighbors, those who can do and what they cannot do? Can we accept that in Europe? So we were perfectly aware. This criticism, let's be honest, is a very bad faith criticism made by some diplomats of the national governments in Europe, that because the Commission was leading, but during, let me tell you also, during 5 years of negotiation, there was never, to me, a member country, from France to Germany, to anyone saying, please don't do it. On the contrary, they were supporting. They were, all of them in Vilnius to sign the agreement. But now, afterwards, what happened was, of course, a tragedy. We know that. But to put the blame on us, it was not us who caused the tragedy. The tragedy was created by the absolutely wrong, and by the way, I think it's a strategic mistake for Russia as well. I have nothing against the Russian people, on the contrary. I think it is a huge, one of the biggest strategic mistakes we can conceive of the decision, that is the decision of Putin to invade against all norms of international law, bilateral agreements, against all principles, to invade a country that was their neighbor. And they'll be there, by the way, as a neighbor.
Let me ask you then to look forward a bit, because, as you said, it is a violation of international law, and as you also began to say, as a result, it is a war that is going to affect the global south as well as Europe and the US. Because if the international order is beginning to fall apart, every calculation every state, country in the world has made about we can rely on the international order suddenly goes out the window. The EU has always been the preeminent voice for the international order. What does the EU need to do now, particularly in the area of national security and defense? Because that gets to this issue of national sovereignty, which has always been difficult for Brussels to coordinate, to control. There's been, one of your successors, Ms. von der Leyen, has said there should be a defense portfolio within the Commission. Is that necessary, or is NATO the place for this to have this conversation?
We need a stronger identity of security and defense in Europe. It's indispensable. And I think now the European Union is finally leaving behind what I call the geopolitical teenager nature. So political adolescence. The world changed completely after the invasion of Ukraine, and it's still changing. And Europe has changed. Not only the European Union. When we have Finland and Sweden joining NATO, that would be unthinkable 3 years ago. Unthinkable. And now we have Finland and Sweden members of NATO. And also people did not notice it so much, but Denmark, in a popular vote by a huge majority, that they had an opt-out about European defense. Now they are part of the European mechanisms of defense. So, as always, and you know very well the European Union, Peter, as always, the European Union by definition is incremental. It's slow, sometimes frustratingly slow. It's step by step. But I have no doubts of direction of travel. The European Union is now becoming more geopolitical. I mean, when I think, just to give an example, because all the other facts I'm sure you know, but I can share some of my experience. When we were preparing the budget of the European Union that the Commission presented for 2014-2020, we created the so-called Horizon 2020. It was 80 billion euros for research. I tried, consulting some member states and European Parliament, that some of that expenditure could be for dual-use technologies. Because I knew the experience of the United States and how effective the United States have been linking research and universities with defense. I was professor at the United States also for some time. You cannot imagine the pushback I received, saying, what, President Barroso, what are you doing? Are you trying to transform the European Union into a military organization? We are a civilian organization. I told them, look, I love Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, but we cannot be seen as a supranational organization of Boy Scouts. The European Union, if it wants to exist, it has to have a foreign policy and a security policy. The first duty of a political entity like the European Union is to protect us, together, of course, with NATO. And NATO, the remaining, because of the Atlantic relationship, is crucially important for us. But now, some of those pushback was coming in, remember, from the Greens from Germany. Now when I see the Greens in Germany being the more hawkish against Russia, I think amazing how things change. So the reality is that European Union is now, and what's going on in Germany is very important. Sometimes sorry to say it, in the American and British media, there is some comments not very nice about Germany. They don't understand where Germany is coming from. For Germany, after the Second World War, most people killed were in the former Soviet Union. We have to understand the relationship between Germany and Russia. I call it a relationship made of complicity and complacency. Complicity because there was some interest there. The former, let's say, the former Chancellor of Germany